Can one man's hidden past unlock a miracle for a girl who's lost everything? Real Stories Diary brings you a tale of redemption, trust, and the power of human connection. Wood shavings spiraled to the floor, around Michael Stone's scarred hands. His knife carved through maple with ruthless precision. Outside his workshop window, a black BMW gleamed like a predator in Millbrook's morning mist. The stranger in the $1,000 suit clutched a manila envelope against his chest, trembling. Michael's steel-gray eyes locked onto the man's desperate face through the glass. A carving knife froze mid-stroke. Something twisted in his gut. Recognition? Maybe fear. What secret is Michael hiding that could change a stranger's life forever? Stay tuned to Real Stories Diary to find out. The stranger's polished shoes scraped against weathered wood as he stepped closer. "My daughter, she hasn't moved in 6 months," the man's voice shattered through the door, raw with exhaustion and despair. "The doctors say there's nothing more they can do. I've spent everything, every connection, every favor, every last hope." Michael set down his knife and opened the door, seeing the hollow devastation in the father's red-rimmed eyes. "Let me help her," he said quietly. Michael had been hiding in this small Connecticut town for 2 years now, carving furniture and children's toys, pretending the steady rhythm of woodwork could silence the ghosts that haunted his sleep. Millbrook was the kind of place where secrets stayed buried beneath layers of small-town politeness and autumn leaves. Through the thin walls, he could hear his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, humming while she got ready for school, her voice the only thing that kept him anchored to this new life he'd built from the ashes of his old one. The morning air carried the scent of burning wood from nearby chimneys, mixing with the sharp smell of wood glue that clung to his workshop like a second skin. He'd chosen this place precisely because it was somewhere a man could disappear, could become someone else entirely. The stranger standing at his door looked like he'd been hollowed out from the inside. Richard Wellington, though Michael recognized him despite never having met him, stood 6 feet tall but seemed somehow smaller, diminished by months of sleepless nights and medical consultations that led nowhere. His expensive suit hung loose on a frame that had probably lost 20 pounds since his daughter's accident, and his hands trembled as he clutched that manila envelope like it contained his last prayer. Behind him, the BMW's engine ticked as it cooled, looking out of place among the pickup trucks and beat-up sedans that usually graced this working-class neighborhood. Michael could see it in the man's face, that particular brand of desperation that came from having unlimited resources but finding them utterly useless against the thing that mattered most. "You've got the wrong person," Michael said. But his voice lacked conviction. He knew exactly who Richard Wellington was, CEO of Hartford Insurance, a man whose company logo appeared on billboards throughout New England. More importantly, he knew about the accident that had dominated local news 6 months ago, when a promising 16-year-old honor student's car had wrapped around an oak tree on a rainy night. The fact that Wellington was standing at his door meant someone had talked. Someone who knew about the life he'd left behind, the skills he'd buried along with his wife's medical bills and his own shattered confidence. Richard's voice grew stronger, more insistent, cutting through Michael's carefully constructed denial like a scalpel through flesh. "I know you used to be Dr. Michael Stone, head of neurosurgery at Yale New Haven. I know you performed miracles before you disappeared." Richard's words came out in a rush, as if he'd rehearsed them 1,000 times during sleepless nights. "My daughter, Sarah, has been paralyzed from the waist down since the accident. And every specialist in the country says there's nothing more they can do. But I heard whispers in the medical community about techniques you were developing, about cases where you brought people back from impossible situations." Michael's jaw tightened as memories crashed over him like ice water, the operating room lights, the delicate dance of scalpel and suture, the godlike feeling of holding someone's future in his steady hands. And then the nightmare that ended it all, the steady beeping of monitors that suddenly went flat, his wife's face going pale on the table he'd sworn would save her. Richard stepped closer, his desperation palpable in the morning air. "I've tried everything: experimental treatments in Switzerland, stem cell therapy in Germany, acupuncture, meditation retreats, faith healers. I've spent over $3 million chasing hope, and nothing has worked. But Sarah, she's not just paralyzed physically. She's given up completely. My brilliant, fierce daughter has just stopped fighting, and I'm watching her die a little more each day." His voice broke on the last words, and Michael saw the raw anguish of a father who'd exhausted every option except this final, desperate gamble. "You want to know what doctors can't do?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They can't bring back the dead. They can't undo the mistakes that haunt you every night. And they sure as hell can't promise miracles to broken fathers who think former surgeons can fix what the best hospitals in the world couldn't. But even as he spoke the words, Michael found himself stepping aside to let Richard Wellington into his workshop. The park at noon was nearly empty, except for a few joggers and an elderly man feeding ducks by the pond. Michael arrived first, choosing a bench beneath a massive maple whose leaves rained down like golden coins with every gust of wind. He'd spent the morning trying to focus on a commissioned rocking horse, but his hands had shaken so badly he'd nearly ruined the intricate mane he'd been carving for weeks. When Richard Wellington appeared, walking slowly across the grass with his shoulders hunched under an invisible weight, Michael noticed he'd traded his expensive suit for jeans and a simple wool coat. The transformation was striking. Without the armor of wealth, Richard looked like any other desperate father, clinging to his last thread of hope. He sat down beside Michael without invitation, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled out his phone. "This is Sarah, 6 months ago," Richard said, showing Michael a photo of a beautiful teenager with long blonde hair and intelligent green eyes, standing proudly beside what looked like a science fair display. She just won first place for her project on neural regeneration and spinal cord injuries. Full scholarship to Harvard, wanted to study medicine and change the world. She used to say that every problem had a solution if you were smart enough to find it. His voice caught as he swiped to the next photo, the same girl in a hospital bed, unconscious and surrounded by machines, her face pale and peaceful in a way that suggested she might never wake up. The accident happened on Route 9 during a thunderstorm. Some drunk driver ran a red light, and Sarah's car rolled 4 times before hitting an oak tree. She was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when she finally woke up, Richard's voice trailed off as he struggled with the memory. The spinal cord damage was complete at the L1 vertebra, Richard continued, falling into the clinical language he'd learned during months of medical consultations. Total paralysis below the waist, no sensation, no voluntary movement, no hope of recovery according to every neurologist we've consulted. But the physical paralysis isn't the worst part. Sarah used to light up every room she entered, used to argue with her teachers about philosophy and debate politics at the dinner table. Now she won't speak to anyone, won't eat unless I force her, won't even look out the window. It's like the accident didn't just break her spine, it shattered her spirit. Michael studied the photos, seeing not just Sarah's face, but the faces of dozens of patients he treated over the years, young people whose futures had been stolen by random acts of violence, whose families had looked to him for miracles he couldn't always deliver. "What makes you think I can help her when Harvard's best neurologists can't?" Michael asked, though something in Sarah's eyes reminded him of another young woman who'd faced impossible odds with fierce determination. "Because you didn't just treat patients, you revolutionized how we think about neural recovery," Richard replied, pulling out a newspaper clipping yellowed with age. The headline read, "Local surgeon develops breakthrough spinal cord treatment," and the photo showed a much younger Michael accepting an award for innovative surgical techniques. "This article is from 5 years ago. It mentions your experimental work with neural pathway reconstruction, your theory that intensive fine motor training could help the brain create new connections around damaged spinal tissue. The medical community called you a visionary before you disappeared." Michael's throat tightened as he read his own words quoted in the article, promises about the future of spinal cord treatment that now felt like prophecies from a different lifetime. "That was before my wife, Elena, died on my operating table," Michael said, handing back the clipping, "before I learned that vision doesn't mean anything when you can't save the person who matters most to you. These hands that had saved hundreds of lives failed when it mattered most, and I haven't picked up a scalpel since." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither man was sure they wanted to cross. Richard was quiet for several minutes, processing what he'd just heard. When he finally spoke, his words were carefully chosen, gentle but insistent. "Maybe that's exactly why you're the right person to help Sarah. Not because you're perfect, but because you understand what it's like to lose everything and have to find a way to keep living. Sarah isn't just paralyzed physically, she's paralyzed emotionally, spiritually. She needs someone who knows what it's like to fall from the top of the world and still find reasons to get up in the morning." Against every instinct screaming at him to walk away, Michael found himself nodding. "I'll meet her," he said finally. "But I need you to understand something. I can't make promises about medical outcomes. Whatever I try to do for Sarah, it won't be about surgery or traditional medicine. Those days are behind me." Richard's relief was visible, his shoulders sagging as if an enormous weight had been lifted. "What would it be about then?" he asked. Michael looked down at his hands, these instruments that had once performed miracles and caused his greatest tragedy, now rough and stained from months of woodworking. "Something I've been learning slowly, one carving at a time," he said. "The art of healing without cutting, of rebuilding without destroying, of finding beauty in broken things." As they stood to leave, Michael realized he was stepping back into a world he'd sworn to leave behind. The Wellington mansion sat on 5 acres of manicured lawn in Millbrook's most exclusive neighborhood, a Tudor-style monument to success that felt as cold and imposing as a mausoleum. Michael pulled his battered pickup truck into the circular driveway, feeling like an intruder in this world of marble fountains and professionally landscaped gardens. Through the tall windows, he could see glimpses of expensive artwork and furniture, but the house felt hollow, as if all the money in the world couldn't fill the emptiness left by tragedy. A middle-aged Hispanic woman answered the door. "Senor Stone," Rosa said, her accent thick but her English clear. "I am glad you have come." "The senorita, she needs someone who understands what it is like to lose everything." She led him through hallways lined with family photos that told the story of happier times, Richard and a beautiful blonde woman Michael assumed was Sarah's mother, vacation pictures from exotic locations, birthday parties with elaborate cakes and genuine smiles. "Senora Wellington, she died when Sarah was 12, Rosa explained, noticing his glance at the photos. "Cancer, like your wife." "Senor Richard, he tried to be both parents, but sometimes a father's love is not enough to heal a broken heart." They stopped at the bottom of a curved staircase, and Rosa looked up toward the second floor with worried eyes. "Sarah, she has not left her room in 3 weeks. The physical therapists, the counselors, even her friends from school, she refuses to see anyone." Michael climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a journey deeper into someone else's pain. The house was beautiful but sterile, lacking the warmth and lived-in feeling of a real home. At the top of the stairs, Rosa pointed to a closed door at the end of the hallway. "She knows you are coming," Rosa whispered. "But she may not speak to you. Be patient with her, Senor Stone. She is not angry at the world, she is angry at herself for surviving when maybe she shouldn't have." Through the thin wood, Michael could hear the faint sound of classical music, something melancholy and beautiful that matched the mood of the entire house. When he finally knocked, the music stopped, but no voice called for him to enter. After a moment, he tried the handle and found it unlocked. Sarah Wellington sat in a state-of-the-art wheelchair by her bedroom window, staring out at the autumn landscape with a 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much pain for her 16 years. She didn't turn when Michael entered, didn't acknowledge his presence in any way, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests like she was holding on for dear life. The room was a study in contrasts, expensive furniture and electronics mixed with medical equipment, teenage posters of bands and movies hanging alongside get-well cards that had clearly gone unread. On her nightstand sat a framed photo of a younger Sarah crossing the finish line at what looked like a track meet, arms raised in victory, face glowing with the pure joy of accomplishment. It was a painful reminder of everything the accident had stolen from her. "You can leave now," Sarah said without turning around, her voice flat and emotionless. "I don't need another person telling me how sorry they are, or how I need to stay positive, or how everything happens for a reason. My father's brought a parade of specialists, therapists, and miracle workers through this room, and none of them can change the fact that I'm never walking again." Michael didn't move, didn't speak, just stood quietly in the doorway, studying this broken girl who reminded him so much of himself in the months after Elena's death, the same hollow eyes, the same protective anger, the same desperate attempt to push away anyone who might offer hope, only to snatch it away again. He could see the intelligence burning beneath her despair, the fierce mind that was now turned entirely toward the task of destroying itself. "You're right," Michael said simply, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "I'm not here to fix you, or cure you, or fill you with false hope about walking again. And you're absolutely right that everything doesn't happen for a reason. Sometimes terrible things just happen to good people, and there's no meaning in it except the meaning we choose to create afterward." Sarah's eyebrows lifted slightly, clearly not the response she'd expected from another adult trying to help her. Then why are you here? She asked, some of the hardness leaving her voice. Michael looked around the room, taking in the medical equipment, the unused art supplies gathering dust on a shelf, the guitar leaning against the wall with its strings slack from disuse. Because I think you and I might be lost in the same way, he said. And sometimes it helps to have company when you're trying to find your way back. For the first time since he'd entered the room, Sarah's mask slipped slightly, revealing a flicker of curiosity beneath the protective anger. Back to what? She asked. I don't know yet, Michael admitted, but I'd like to find out. Over the next hour, they sat in Sarah's room talking about everything except the accident and the paralysis. Michael told her about Emma, about the simple pleasure of watching his daughter discover the world through 8-year-old eyes. Sarah talked about the books she'd been reading, complex novels about philosophy and human nature that most adults would struggle with. Gradually, the wall she'd built around herself began to crack, revealing glimpses of the brilliant, passionate girl she'd been before tragedy reshaped her world. I used to paint, she admitted, glancing toward the art supplies on her shelf. I loved the way colors could blend together to create something entirely new. But my hands shake now from the medications. And besides, what could I possibly create that would matter? What if I told you I might know a different way to work with your hands? Michael asked carefully. Something that doesn't require steady control or perfect technique? Sarah turned back to him with skeptical curiosity. Like what? Michael pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of one of his recent wood carvings, a small bird with intricate feather details that seemed to capture movement even in stillness. Wood carving, he said. It's forgiving, patient, and it responds to feeling more than precision. The wood tells you what it wants to become, you just have to listen. Sarah studied the photo for a long moment, and Michael could see her analytical mind working, considering possibilities she hadn't imagined before. Why would you want to teach me? She asked. Because, Michael said, putting his phone away, I think we both need to remember what it feels like to create something beautiful again. As Michael prepared to leave, Sarah called out to him from her wheelchair. If I agree to let you teach me, I have conditions. You don't treat me like I'm broken. You don't give me inspirational speeches. And if I tell you to leave, you leave. Michael considered her terms, recognizing the fierce independence that still burned within her. Deal, he said. When do we start? Michael arrived at the Wellington house the next morning carrying a worn leather tool bag and a small piece of basswood. Rosa led him upstairs to Sarah's room, where she waited with a mixture of anticipation and skepticism written across her face. Change of plans, Michael announced. We're not working up here. Grab a jacket. We're going outside. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. I don't go outside anymore, she said quickly, the old defensive walls starting to rise again. Too many variables, too many people staring. Michael set his tool bag down and pulled up a chair to face her directly. Sarah, I can teach you to carve wood in this sterile room surrounded by medical equipment. Or I can teach you where the craft was meant to be learned, under an open sky, with the smell of autumn in the air and the sound of real life happening around us. After several long minutes of internal struggle, Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. Fine, but if this turns into some kind of inspirational moment, I'm going back inside. The Wellingtons' back garden was a masterpiece of landscape design, with stone pathways winding through carefully curated flower beds and mature trees that provided natural privacy screens. Michael chose a spot near a small pond where a wooden bench sat beneath an old oak tree, its branches creating a canopy of gold and crimson leaves that filtered the morning sunlight into dancing patterns. He positioned Sarah's wheelchair next to the bench so she could rest her arms comfortably while working. First lesson, he said, pulling out the piece of basswood, is about listening. Every piece of wood has a story, where it grew, what kind of weather it endured, how it lived and died. Before you make the first cut, you need to understand what you're working with. He placed the wood in Sarah's hands, guiding her fingers along the grain. Feel that? The way the fibers run in long, straight lines. That's the wood's natural structure. Work with it, not against it, and it will reward you. Sarah's hands moved tentatively over the wood's surface, her analytical mind clearly cataloging textures and patterns that most people would overlook. It's warmer than I expected, she said, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. And it has this subtle smell, like growing things, like life. Michael nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. Wood never really dies, it just transforms. Every time you carve it, you're participating in that transformation, helping it become something new. He pulled out a small carving knife with a comfortable wooden handle worn smooth by years of use. This was my grandfather's knife, he explained. It taught me that the tool is just an extension of your hand, your intention, your respect for the material. The magic isn't in the knife, it's in the connection between you and what you're creating. For the first hour, Michael didn't let Sarah make a single cut, instead having her practice holding the knife and understanding how different grips would affect her control. When Sarah finally made her first cut, the knife slipped slightly, taking off more wood than intended. She cursed under her breath, her face flushing with frustration. I told you my hands shake, she said, starting to set the knife down. This was a stupid idea. Michael gently stopped her. Look at what you just did, he said, pointing to the accidental gouge in the wood. See how that changes the character of the piece? What if that wasn't a mistake, but the beginning of something unexpected? Sarah studied the irregular cut, her artistic eye beginning to see possibilities instead of just errors. I could work with it, she said slowly. Make it part of the design instead of trying to hide it. Michael smiled. Now you're thinking like a carver. Some of the most beautiful pieces I've ever seen came from working around unexpected challenges. As the morning progressed, Sarah began to relax into the rhythm of the craft, her movements becoming more confident with each small success. Over the following weeks, Michael and Sarah fell into a comfortable routine. Every weekday morning at 10, he would arrive with his tool bag and whatever piece of wood they'd selected for that day's project. Sarah's skills developed rapidly, her natural artistic sense combining with fierce determination to produce increasingly sophisticated pieces. She carved a small bird, then a flower, then a miniature tree, complete with textured bark and delicate leaves. Each project pushed her abilities further, and Michael watched with growing amazement as her confidence returned along with her technical skills. More importantly, he noticed changes that had nothing to do with carving. Sarah had begun reading again, had started video calling with friends from school, and had even expressed interest in eventually continuing her education. The girl who hadn't spoken to anyone in months was slowly coming back to life. Hook, but what happens when Sarah uncovers the truth about Michael's past? Will it destroy their bond or lead to an even greater breakthrough? Keep watching Real Stories Diary to see how this story unfolds. But it was during their third week together that Sarah first noticed something odd about Michael's teaching methods. They were working on a particularly challenging piece when Sarah's knife slipped and nearly cut her finger. Michael's reaction was instantaneous and telling. He caught her hand in his, examined the near miss with clinical precision, checked her pulse and pupil response, and asked detailed questions about any numbness or tingling she might be experiencing. It was the behavior of someone with extensive medical training, not a simple woodworker. You did that like a doctor, Sarah said, studying his face carefully. Actually, you've been doing a lot of things like a doctor, the way you watch my hands, the questions you asked about my physical therapy, even the way you positioned my wheelchair for optimal ergonomics. Michael's stomach dropped as he realized his cover was beginning to slip. I told you I used to study medicine, he said carefully. But Sarah's analytical mind was already connecting dots he'd hoped would remain scattered. Studying medicine and being a doctor are two different things, she replied. And you have the hands of someone who's done surgery, steady, precise, completely confident, even when teaching a different skill. She set down her carving knife and wheeled closer to him, her green eyes sharp with curiosity. My father's been acting strange lately, too, like he's keeping a secret. What kind of doctor were you? And why are you pretending to be something else? Michael felt the walls of his carefully constructed new identity beginning to crumble, and he realized that Sarah's intelligence and perceptiveness made her far more dangerous to his anonymity than he'd anticipated. The truth was going to come out, and when it did, everything would change between them. Michael stared at the half-carved horse in his hands, its wooden eyes seeming to judge him for the deception he'd been living for months. I was a neurosurgeon, he admitted finally. Specialized in spinal cord injuries and brain trauma. I developed some experimental techniques for neural pathway reconstruction, published papers that made waves in the medical community. Sarah's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, anger, understanding, and finally a cold fury that made her look older than her 16 years. "So, this whole thing, the wood carving, the friendship, all of it, you've been studying me like a lab rat." Her voice was dangerously quiet. "Were you planning to write a paper about using art therapy on paralyzed teenagers? Is that what this is about?" Michael could see the walls going back up around her, higher and stronger than before, and he realized he was about to lose not just her trust, but any chance of helping her heal. "No," Michael said firmly. "The carving is real, Sarah. My caring about you is real. I'm not studying you or planning to publish anything about our work together." He set down his tools and faced her directly, knowing that only complete honesty would have any chance of salvaging their relationship. "I stopped practicing medicine 3 years ago after my wife died during surgery I performed on her. I couldn't save the person who mattered most to me, so I lost faith in my ability to help anyone. I came to Millbrook to hide, to live quietly and try to forget what I used to be." Sarah listened with the same intense focus she brought to her carving, weighing his words for truth or deception. "Your father found me because he'd heard rumors in the medical community about my research. He was desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. But I didn't agree to help you because of your medical condition. I agreed because I recognized something in your eyes that I'd seen in my own mirror every morning." "What?" Sarah asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. "The look of someone who used to believe they could change the world but lost that belief when the world changed them instead," Michael replied. "I saw a potential in you that had nothing to do with whether you'll ever walk again and everything to do with whether you'll find reasons to keep creating, keep growing, keep becoming the person you're meant to be." Sarah was quiet for a long time, studying the wooden horse as if it could provide answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. "If you're really a neurosurgeon, why haven't you tried to examine me, evaluate my condition, offer medical opinions about my prognosis?" she asked finally. "Because I'm not your doctor," Michael said. "I'm your friend, and friends don't see disabilities, they see possibilities." For the first time since learning his secret, Sarah's expression softened slightly. "So, the carving really isn't medical therapy disguised as art?" she asked. "It's just carving," Michael nodded. "Just carving that happens to be good for the soul." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of an unfamiliar voice drifting across the garden, authoritative, professional, with the crisp diction of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Dr. Stone," the voice called. "I'm Dr. James Morrison from Johns Hopkins. I need to speak with you about your research." Michael's blood turned to ice water. Morrison was one of the most respected neurologists in the country, and more importantly, he was someone who could expose everything Michael had been trying to escape. "Stay here," Michael told Sarah. But she was already maneuvering her wheelchair toward the house. "Like hell," she replied. "If this involves you, and it involves medicine, it involves me, too." As they made their way toward the house, Michael caught glimpses of a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive coat talking intensely with Richard Wellington on the front porch, and he knew that his carefully constructed new life was about to come crashing down. Dr. Morrison was everything Michael remembered and more: imposing, brilliant, and absolutely convinced of his own righteousness. He turned as Michael and Sarah approached, his eyes taking in the wheelchair, the carving tools, the obvious closeness between teacher and student. "Michael," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "you're looking well for a man who's supposed to be having a nervous breakdown in seclusion." Richard Wellington stood beside Morrison, looking uncomfortable, clearly unsure how much he should reveal about the arrangements he'd made. "Dr. Morrison contacted me through mutual acquaintances in the medical community," Richard explained. "He's representing a consortium of hospitals and research institutions that are very interested in your previous work." Morrison stepped forward, his gaze moving from Michael to Sarah with clinical assessment. "More specifically, we're interested in your current work. Word travels fast in our circles, Michael. A paralyzed patient making remarkable progress under the care of a disgraced neurosurgeon. That's exactly the kind of story that gets people's attention." Morrison pulled out a tablet and showed them brain scans that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. "These are images of your brain activity, Miss Wellington, taken during your most recent MRI. Notice the increased activity in the motor cortex areas that correspond to hand and finger movement. That's not accident. That's systematic neural reconstruction happening in real time. Sarah stared at the colorful brain images, seeing proof that something was changing inside her skull, that the carving wasn't just therapy, but some kind of medical treatment she hadn't consented to. "You used me," she said to Michael, her voice barely above a whisper. "All this time you were experimenting on me without telling me what you were doing." Michael reached toward her, but she jerked her wheelchair backward, away from his touch. "Sarah, that's not," he began, but she cut him off with a look of pure betrayal. "Don't you dare lie to me again. You're a neurosurgeon who specializes in spinal cord injuries, and you just happen to decide to teach wood carving to a paralyzed teenager." Morrison stepped between them, clearly enjoying the drama he'd orchestrated. "The odds are 0, Miss Wellington, because it wasn't coincidence. Your father specifically sought out Dr. Stone because of his research, and Dr. Stone agreed to help because he saw an opportunity